I just realized what an absolutely fantastic accomplishment this book was. The depiction of the idiosyncrasies of and the minutiae of everyday Nigerian life with such a careful eye that respects their said idiosyncrasies as worthy of attention, of chronicling, of reinventing. And the language is sinuous. It is maneuvering the reader through stories with a clear-eyed pragmatism and a masterful and often hilarious use of irony. You have an eye that is both, or Uche has an eye that is both generous and discerning, and the careful attention asks the reader, won't you see them clearly too? There is, what is that saying, the writing that sort of defamiliarizes the familiar. And this is one of those books that took a world that I thought I knew and shined attention upon these small moments between people, between Nigerians, between families, with what I found to be an absolutely delightful sense of irony. You are, particularly when you write a child narrator, there's a masterful eye, a masterful, and like a deftness with emotion, particularly in depicting the envy between children, something that comes up quite a bit in several of the stories, and it's an envy that is both sort of like childish in the way that children are, but also very dense and complicated. And I just found this book to be just utterly marvelous. And so I would like for you to, if you wanted to go ahead and read something for us, and then I have some questions for you.
I'll start by reading something from the last story in the collection, which I think is maybe the most, one of the harder stories to read in the collection. I think it's about a mother and her daughter, and they're trapped in a mother's cycle of grief and mental illness. I'll read from the opening. It's called Burning. Adana knows her mother's faces. There is a face for the days when she wakes up with a light in her eyes, and they stay home eating 2 sweet balls of puff-puff, batches and batches pouring out of her mother's pan, and forming small steaming hills on every surface in the kitchen. On days like this, they rewatch her mother's collection of Nollywood films, in which good and evil are separate like oil and water, and justice comes swift from heaven in the form of lightning. On other happy days, they visit Tejuosho Market and make their way through a maze of clothes shops, male traders whistling at their backsides and grabbing at their arms, and Adana's mother throwing smiles at them over her shoulder, while Adana tries to shrink herself to nothing. When they return home with piles of clothes, Adana's mother says with a conspiratorial wink, "Good thing it's your grandfather's money paying for all this." There come the days when her mother is unable to drag herself out of bed. On these days, her face is pale with fear, her eyes darting at the slightest sound. Adana's mother buries this face in a pillow and refuses to get up, and Adana makes her own breakfast, a cup of Milo and 2 slices of bread, and eats it standing in the quiet kitchenette. Then, in the bedroom she and her mother share, she puts on her blue shirt and pink pinafore, and heads for the front door, hoping to hear her mother's voice call out at the last moment with an offering, to walk with her, maybe, or a promise to be there when the bell rang at the end of the school day. One time, her mother did call out to her from under the bedding, told Adana to hold on as she put on a t-shirt and tied a wrapper around her waist. She took Adana's hand, along with a deep breath, and they walked out the door together. The pressure of her mother's grip, the quiet slapping of her slippers against her feet, made up for those mornings Adana had walked alone. With her mother holding her hand, Adana would not have to tug at strangers' sleeves at the busy junction and ask for help to cross the road. But barely halfway to school, her mother's fingers went limp and let go of Adana's. Her mother sank, squatting in the street and burying her face in her hands. Adana stood stunned, feeling naked as strangers stared at them. She wanted to keep walking and ignore the anchor pulling her down, pretend that the moaning ball of flesh had no connection to her. She resisted the urge to scream at her mother, at the sky, at all the people watching them but moving on, minding their business. Instead, she knelt on the warm asphalt and rubbed her mother's back in circles, around and around. The noise of traffic and hawkers and conversation faded until all she could hear was her mother's muffled sobbing. When Adana's mother stood again, it was Adana's hand holding hers, guiding her back home.
So I had some other questions before that one. Since you read that story, I'm going to skip ahead. So there are a lot of charlatans in this book. People who essentially dupe the earnest, who are seeking either redemption or salvation in some way. And so I wanted to talk about this sort of thread of deceit that appears quite a bit in the book, and just sort of why that is.
I'm not sure. Well, when you say deceit, it makes me think of the snake cover. I think that was one of the reasons that a snake ended up on the cover of this book. But I think for me, something that I find really interesting in fiction is just like interpersonal drama. All the little things that we feel but don't say that then turn into big things. And I think that like deception is, I mean, we're constantly hiding aspects of ourselves from different people, even people that are closest to us, I think. So I always find it interesting to like kind of scratch at the deception and like see what's underneath all of that. And particularly with families, I love stories about dysfunctional families. I think that tension between family members, particularly mothers and daughters, can be very interesting to play with in fiction. So I don't know, I just think the things that we hide, the things that we choose to show, how we make those decisions, I just find that very interesting in fiction. So maybe that's why I'm drawn to these kinds of stories.
Yeah. Another thing that happens, and I don't know if you have a reading that sort of fits in this, but while we're talking about charlatans, let's go ahead. There is also often situations where people pay for either the mistakes or the deceit of others, right? And there's a lot of that happens in the stories, and then I'm thinking in particular of, the first story in Mario Belgium. I mean, that's sort of the biggest example. This story is just, it's just under my heart and my throat the whole time, because you just see it coming, it's like, oh God.
That's my mom's favorite story.
Okay, once you read the story, you'll realize how funny it is, and that's hilarious to me, that's your mom's favorite story. But yes, and so sort of, I guess maybe sort of, sort of taking a little bit of a sort of a sideways step away from deceit to this idea of people sort of, their comeuppance are as a result of somebody else's actions rather than their own, and how does that, and that's something that appears, recurs quite a bit in the book, and so I was wondering if you could talk about, whether that is something that you knew that you were doing, or if it's something that is deliberate, or was a surprise to you?
Well, I haven't thought of it in that way until you just said it. But it makes sense to me as something that would recur in my stories. Maybe because I'm kind of like a pessimist in many ways about the world and about justice and whether justice is even like achievable most of the time. So maybe this is why my stories have characters who don't necessarily get what they deserve, or justice is kind of skewed in a lot of the stories. I think it's a reflection of maybe my own view of the world. There was a time in my life when I tried to only write like stories that ended happily, stories that ended well.
How does that go?
Because I think I said this in an interview before, but I didn't say why I was trying to write stories like that. And the reason I was trying to write stories like that is because the person I was dating at the time, we were both Christians, or trying to be very Christian. And he said something about, oh, like, this is not, I don't know, something about, like, this is not, I'm not writing stories that bring joy. And so, like, kind of like I'm using my gift in the wrong way.
Oh, I have words.
So I was like, okay. I'm going to try to write stories that only bring joy. That didn't last very long, because every time I would get an idea for a story, I would think it through and I'd be like, wow, this story is not going to bring joy. Okay, we're not doing this. Then another idea would come, oh, joy. There's no joy here. So I gave up on the idea very quickly. But I think it's just kind of a reflection of my sense of the world as not a very just place where people mostly get what they deserve. I don't necessarily believe that, and I think maybe that comes across in our stories.
It's funny because I think that the only genre where there's a consistent happy ending is romance.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's literally the only genre where there's a consistent happy ending. And so, that's such an absurd idea that that you're using your gifts wrong because you're being realistic about.
And I believe
the world.
it.
Well, I'm glad that you veered away from that. Did you want to read something else, or are you ready for another question?
I can read something else.
Okay.
Okay, so this one needs a little bit of context because I'm not reading from the opening. This one is called Eden, and it's about two siblings, the boy and the girl. Madu is the boy; he's 10 years old. Ifechi is the girl; she's 7 years old, and they're growing up in Lagos, Nigeria, in the 90s. And so the story starts one day when they discover they're bored at home alone, and they discover their father's collection of pornography, like his cassette tapes, and they're watching. They're making their way through the tapes, watching on the VCR, and the story is set in Nigeria, so we have a lot of power cuts where the electricity goes, and then the thing is the cassette is stuck in the VCR player, and then that becomes a problem because they don't want to get caught. So the portion I'll be reading from is from Ifechi's perspective. She's a 7-year-old sister, and they've been watching these tapes for a while, and now it's starting to affect her relationship with the family, and she's losing her innocence. One rainy night, when there was no electricity, the children played catch the lights with their father. Their mother lay on the couch, laughing and shouting warnings. Catch the lights was their game, invented by their father for nights like this, when electricity was gone and stomachs were full, and the silence in the room had no extra weight to it. He would put out the candles and let the warm darkness surround them. Then he would turn on his flashlight and move the beam of light on the floor and all around the room, the children scrambling to touch it with their hands or feet. It was the only game they played together. The stakes were high on this night. Their father had promised the winner 3 over-the-head spins to be redeemed at any time of the winner's choosing. Madu and Ifechi loved being held above the head of their tall father, loved opening their eyes to see the furniture, barely discernible in the dark, whirling around them. A dizzying sensation remained after they were set down gently, like honey lingering on their tongues. But most of all, they loved the chafing feel of their father's arms as he gripped them, and they imagined that his hands left an imprint that remained long after he let go. The Children rushed from spot to spot, shrieking and stretching their limbs toward the light. But just when they thought they'd got it, the light would move away and they would laugh out their frustration. The light was all they could see, and they followed wherever it went, sometimes bumping into each other and their father. One time, their father directed the beam of light to a spot close to his feet. Ifechi followed, but instead of chasing the light, her eyes landed on her father's right foot. The nail of his big toe was long, yellow from the light. Specks of dirt or lint stuck in the corners where nail met skin. Ifechi could not move. In one of her father's films, a man had moaned in ecstasy while he kissed and nibbled on a woman's foot, sucked on the dainty toes with their red nail polish, opened his mouth wide as half of the woman's foot vanished into it. Ifechi felt her heart pounding as she pulled her eyes away from her father's foot. She glanced at her mother's dark form on the couch. Had her mother's feet ever disappeared into the mouth of her father like that, like prey being consumed by a python? Had her father made sounds just like the man in the film, like he was dying but didn't want it to stop? Ifechi tried to find her father's face in the gloom, certain that he knew what she was thinking, what she and Madu had done. But he was still moving the light, and Madu was still running and screaming. Everything felt normal. When their father was ready to let someone win, it was Madu who was chosen. Madu and their father spun together, their laughter filling the empty spaces in the room, while Ifechi watched with remorse from her place on the ground. Stop there.
So, this story was quite disturbing. But there is a moment, so you do, the child narrator, you handle that voice so deftly, and there was actually a moment, it shouldn't be as funny, but there was actually a moment early in the book, early in that story where, when they start watching the videos and she sees a particular body part that's very pink, and she realizes, she's like, pink was her favorite color at that point. She's like, well, now I'm gonna go with yellow. And there was just really something really just delightful and really funny about that. And you do that a lot in your stories, where this sort of very sort of natural depiction of a child's the interpretation of what's happening and the reaction to what's happening, as an adult reader, right? We have that that makes something hilarious that would not be obviously to a child. And so I'm just wondering, you do have quite a bit of stories in this collection that are from a child's perspective, and I'm just curious about what draws you to that perspective, and how you learn to get that down so well.
What draws me to it? A friend of mine has a theory that I'm trying to relive out my own childhood, and that's why I keep writing stories about children. That could be part of it, but also I find child characters interesting because I think they can be a very good way to explore that conflict between innocence and cruelty, because I feel like children can be quite cruel. And I also like to play with, I think it's called dramatic irony, when, what the adult reader knows that the child character doesn't know or is still trying to understand or trying to reckon with. I think child characters can be very good for that kind of irony, and a coming of age story is just often fascinating to me. I just think that there's a lot that can be done with a child character, particularly when they are so I think of the child character as in some ways almost like a default underdog. So I'm also kind of interested in seeing how how a story can subvert that in a way, how the power dynamic can shift, not completely, but in small, subtle ways, how the child character can be, how the child can rebel and exercise some agency. And particularly with like stories that are set in Nigeria, with Nigerian parents, and like with all the, all our societies, Nigerian societies, kind of like adults with supreme kind of, mentality. Like, how much power can a child exercise? What can they get away with? I'm very interested in playing with those questions and stories.
Yeah, and so that's interesting about the idea of how a child can exact some sort of agency, particularly in I don't know if this is on your roster to read, particularly in stories where children are among themselves. Like you have two stories that are set in boarding school, right? And those are situations where children can be quite brutal. Like speaking from experience, children can be quite brutal. And there is just, sort of the hierarchy of popularity, the hierarchy of acceptance just gets magnified in a boarding school where where the adults just aren't really around. Most of the time the children are around each other. And so I'm just curious, did you go to a boarding school in Nigeria, and do you sort of draw from that experience?
Yes, I did. And I draw from the experience a lot. I did not enjoy being in boarding school. I was in the same school for 6 years, and like it was, but I did draw from my experience in boarding school, even with the setting. In one of the stories I set in a boarding school, there's a chimpanzee called Chaka, and in my school we did have a chimpanzee. I don't know how he got there. Or why it was
in the
there.
cage as well.
I think he got there because like there was a portion of the school that was like kind of foresty, and I think it was supposed to be like a mini zoo. It was called the Garden of Eden, and we had like a few animals in there. There was a sad crocodile. I think there was a tortoise at one time, and at some point it was just the chimpanzee that was left. So I think he got moved out, and like he was in a cage just in front of the girls' dormitory. So for the whole 6 years that I was in that school, I left and the chimpanzee was still there. I don't know what happened to it after. But like it would break out of the cage sometimes and just rampage around the school, and everything would get turned upside down. And we would be so happy just to like break out of our routine. But the boarding school setting was, a lot of it was based on my own experience. I would say that that's something that school gave me material for stories.
It's funny that in a couple of stories, the girls who were crying when that was me. That was very much
for 3 full years.
Yeah,
My mom was so bothered. Not bothered enough to take me out.
For the first week, my mom came back every single day. Until the nuns were like, you can't come here anymore. Like she'll never stop crying if you don't stop coming. So, that was a very familiar experience. And so, all right. So, speaking of your experience in boarding school giving you material for stories, how did you come to become a writer? Like, what was your journey? Did you always know this was something that you wanted to do, or is it something that came later on as? And I find that. And I ask this because, for a lot of Nigerians, you tell your parents you want to write, it's like, what? It's like, what is not even a, what are you saying? Right? So I'm just curious about what your journey was to becoming a writer.
I was writing since I was a child. I would like hide myself like in corners of the house and just write. But when did I start to take it seriously? I don't know. I remember my dad was like the first person who like gave me feedback on stories, even though I didn't know that was what he was doing at the time. Like, I would go show him a story and like he would give me margin notes, and I didn't know that revision was a thing, so I was just like, oh, okay, and I'll toss it away. But when I think I would say that I first started taking it seriously as something more than just a hobby. In 2011, after I attended one of the workshops that Chimamanda Adichie hosts in Lagos. So I think it was during and after that workshop where I started to feel like, oh, this could actually be something I take more seriously. But somehow I just always kind of kept at it. For university, I ended up studying English, even though I wanted to study psychology. And after I left university, I started working at Farafina, which is a publisher in Lagos. So I just kind of always gravitated towards this direction. And one time my mom was trying to, like, this was after I graduated from university, and she was trying to like get me to think about other things besides writing and publishing, because she was worried about how I would make money as an editor in a publishing company in Lagos. And she had me go to this interview at like kind of an oil servicing company in Lagos. And like I was just so exasperated by the whole process, and I couldn't hide it from the guy who was interviewing me. Oh God, I feel bad about it now. I think I was a little silly. I didn't know what I was doing. I would do it differently now, but yeah, that's just to say, I just always kind of wanted to continue going in this direction, and yeah, so here I am.
Do you have something else to read, or would you like, can I give you another question?
The last thing I plan to read is on the longer side, so I don't know how we're doing on time.
Oh.
Maybe we could just.
I think that we are, we're okay on time.
We're doing great. Okay. I timed it, so it's about a 7-minute reading. I prefer to read shorter, but this one. Okay, so this one also needs some context. It's called Animals, and it's about a chicken, but it's also not about a chicken. It's about a family where the family members cannot really talk to each other, and so one day mom brings home a chicken, a live chicken, for the first time, and the chicken becomes this thing that everybody kind of projects their desires and expectations in one way or the other. The chicken is carrying the whole burden. We have Neju, who is like a young boy, the son, about 7 years old. Cherish is the teenage daughter, Ebube is the husband, and Uzoma is the wife. So the part where I'll be reading from, she's brought this chicken home, and it's been in the house for weeks, and it's getting to a point where she's like, okay, I really have to kill this chicken. She's never killed a chicken before, so she doesn't really know how to do it. So this weekend she's like, okay, it's going to happen today, whether anybody likes it or not. Oh, by this point her son has gotten very attached to the chicken and has given it a name.
Never let him give it a name.
And giving him a name in a naming ceremony, like not
Yeah.
just person, but like
The whole naming
yes.
ceremony, and he's convinced that the chicken will become a pet. Okay, so she would do it today, she decided, while it was still the weekend. She'd spent all of Saturday watching video after video on the internet showing how to kill a chicken at home. She'd learned that a sharp knife, a firm hand, would minimize the chicken's pain and prevent it from running around the backyard with blood spouting and a partially severed head flopping about. She stepped out to the backyard with a stainless steel bowl and her sharpest knife, which she sharpened further against the concrete step that led down from the kitchen. She held the knife in front of her face. She was pleased at the glint of the blade, the way it grazed the skin of her palm with the thread of blood. Uzoma untied and retied her wrapper around her waist. The chicken was staring her down with its single eye. This is a one-eyed chicken. Her pot of water to dunk the body in after the deed was done was simmering on the stove. Her knife was sharp enough to cut breeze. She took a breath. It was time. Uzoma placed the knife on the ground and returned to the house, ignoring Cherish's "Where are you going?" She went to find her husband in the study. When she opened the door, he snapped his laptop shut. "Cosby, sorry, are you busy?" she asked. He was probably watching porn. She didn't care about his occasional indulgence, but she would never tell him this. So when we were revising this collection, and my agent was concerned that there were 2 stories in this collection that feature fathers that are watching porn as a habit. And she tried to get me to take it out of this particular story. And I was like, no. But what I would do is I would tone it down. So it's less explicit than it was in the previous draft. She didn't care about his occasional indulgence, but she would never tell him this. She thought it potentially useful to make a man feel like he had more to be guilty about than he really did. And her husband, he was see-through, with his guileless face, his lack of ego, a thing she at once loved and despised about him. It was this lack of ego that freed him to pursue her without shame, his besotted heart adorning his sleeve for the world to see. It was what made him the children's preferred parent. Not that they'd ever said as much to her, they wouldn't dare. But it was clear from the way they gravitated towards him, offering him jokes and jabs they would never send her way. It was particularly good with Cherish, who seemed to grow further away from her mother as her young body filled out. Wasn't it only a year ago or so that she and Cherish would spend Sunday afternoons watching movies on African Magic and taking turns scratching dandruff from each other's scalps? Now, Cherish preferred to sit for hours with her father, while they each scrolled through their individual social media pages. Every once in a while, one of them would thrust their phone in the other's face, and they would laugh in sync, their heads colliding. And Neju, how her husband indulged him, rallying her and Cherish to attend that silly naming ceremony for the chicken, breaking the peanuts Nedu offered as if they were the cola nuts one would serve at the child's naming. Uzoma told herself there were advantages to having parents with different styles, one with a gentle touch, one to lay down the law. But sometimes she would hear the echoes of laughter in the house and feel her heart sing, knowing from experience that if she tried to join in, the laughter would sputter into silence. She'd learned to comfort herself with her practicality, her sheer usefulness. She was the one the kids came to when they suddenly remembered on a Sunday night that they needed sheets of cardboard paper for school on Monday. She was the one who could tell, before Cherish could, that the pain pulsing in her daughter's abdomen, the fist clenching and unclenching, was heralding her first period. She was the one who'd hunted down Panadol Extra and soda water after midnight while her husband slept. As Uzoma watched her husband watch her, she decided that he too had grown to over-rely on her. Why else would he assume that she would be the one to kill the chicken? Why should she have to kill an entire animal when she had an entire man in the house? She could picture him telling her, without shame, sorry, he'd never killed a chicken before, and he didn't feel like starting today. Just like he'd been without shame that day, what was it, 2 months ago, when that lousy policeman had taken their family to the police station and made Ebube lie flat on the ground and beg before they were allowed to leave. She remembered how the officer had stopped their car that afternoon at the checkpoint, how his belly strained against the black police issue belt, how unbothered he'd seemed. By her threats to call her friend, the wife of the police commissioner, to report his demand for weekend allowance. No such friend existed, but the officer had no way of knowing this. Still, he stood very calm as she plucked her phone from her handbag and waved it at him through the car window that she refused to roll down beyond a crack. He regarded her with eyes that looked half open, as though he couldn't be bothered to give her his full attention. Madam, he said, his voice unhurried, even playful, you can return that phone to your bag. You have mouth and phone, I have gun and bullets. And then, to her utmost horror, he'd winked at her. Or she'd imagined him winking at her. She would never be sure. The toothpick in the corner of the officer's mouth bobbed, and a pink slice of tongue slipped out to moisten his bottom lip. She looked away, let the phone fall back into her bag. It was at this point that the officer got into the back of their car and ordered her husband to drive, giving him directions to a police station at Unipalo. Uzoma and her husband hadn't had sex since that day. Let me stop there.
So that is my favorite story in the entire collection. So it's a story that rose through all of the family's perspectives, and there are stories that you have that have like dual perspectives, or it's multiple perspectives. I think particularly the first story, I think you sort of jumped in through at least 3 perspectives in that story. But this one, like every sort of named character we get to see in their head, I think that is unique to from the other stories in the collection. And so I'm just wondering how that, like just sort of the crafting of that, how you decided, as opposed to either sticking to the children's perspective, particularly the young boy, and his sort of love affair with this chicken, and what were the sort of craft decisions you made to hop around, and how that was for you?
Trying to remember how. I'm glad you say that this was your favorite story in the collection. I think for me, it was probably the one that was the most fun to write. How did I decide on the different perspectives? I'm trying to remember if that was the way I wrote the first draft, and I think it might have been. I think in terms of point of view, the mother character probably takes up most of the space. So in some ways, I thought of it as her story, but it's not just her story. It's the story of the whole family. I'm not sure how I came to that decision, but I think it was essential because there was no other way to do it. If I was going to use the chicken as this like point of I don't know, this thing that they would all keep coming back to, but this thing that would this thing that should allow them to communicate, but it doesn't. Instead, it becomes more of a barrier for them. I'm not sure how I came to the decision, but I think it was always. I think it came that way. Maybe the first draft, just because I knew I wanted to use a chicken to like kind of explore what was going on with the whole family. I couldn't do it with any one character. It had to be all of them. And so I think it was more of a question of figuring out, okay, what would each character's relationship to this chicken be? For the boy, it was easy. He's the youngest. He's going to love the chicken and want it as a pet. The teenager has more, has different concerns, right? She's thinking about the boy that she likes, and like, her relationship with her mother is not as great as it used to be. And then for the couple, sex is always like an easy way to go for thinking about conflict with the couple. So that's part of it. So yeah, it was just a matter of figuring out what each character's relationship with the chicken is.
And I think my favorite part was the daughter sort of following her mother around with the phone, waiting for like a viral moment with this pulling up this chicken. And there's this sort of really funny line where she says lol, and her mom's like, you can just laugh, you don't have to say lol. And so, so like there are lots of moments of humor like that in the story. And so, how are you so funny?
I don't know. I don't think I'm a funny person. Not in person. But somehow there's humor in the stories. I don't know how. Something that I find surprising though is the second story I read from Eden. I don't think of that story as funny at all. But from feedback that I've gotten, like so when I read that excerpt that I read in other places, like when I read it in other places, I'm just always surprised where people laugh. I didn't think there was anything funny about that.
They're traumatized, right? Yeah.
But people seem to find it funny, at least in portions. So I guess that's a good thing, but it's also a surprising thing. I don't think of myself as funny.
Maybe pessimists find funny easier than optimists.
That could be true.
So we have time for a few questions. If anybody have any questions from anyone in the audience for Uche.
Do we get the chicken's point of view?
Oh, no, we don't. Missed opportunity.
Second edition.
I have not read the collection, but I'm looking forward to it. I think it says on the back that all the stories are set in Nigeria, and I know you live in Nebraska now. And do you feel like, is it somehow easier or more sort of enticing to write about a place when you don't live there for you than when you do? Or were you also, like, did you write some of these in Nigeria?
Yeah, I did. I mostly write about Nigeria because it's the place I know best. Like, I don't feel like I know other places well enough yet to write about them. So I've been in the US since 2017. I'm only just now starting to like write stories that are set here. But even then, they have Nigerian characters that grew up in Nigeria, so they have a Nigerian sensibility. So I don't know, it's the place that's most familiar to me. With time, I'll hopefully learn to write other places. That's why they're all set together.
Is the family in your story about the chicken closest to your own family?
No. Although my mom did have live chickens in the house, but she killed them.
So you kids were used to, hey, I was gonna kill a chicken.
A few times, but yeah, there's always that hope that, okay, this is the one that will be the pet. But it never happens. Yeah.
We have time for one more question if there is another question, otherwise we can wrap. All right, thank you guys for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Well, we have the copies of The Kind of Madness at the front. We're also going to go up there so that Uche can sign some books. We also have copies of Lesley's short story.
Oh, and there's a ton
And there's lots of food, yes.
Please
Yeah.
grab as literally as
Grab your
much as you
snacks.
can.
And then come meet us at the books.
Yeah, if you like disturbing short stories, she writes disturbing
Yeah,
short
there are
stories.
Congratulations on
I
the book.
know, I don't need my freaking books.
Probably come over and down. I'm signing one for my daughter-in-law.
She's back on the writing Arthur. Literary service.
Oh, yes, you have to.
Whenever you
have.
have.
Let's see. I did notice a couple of
I know. I was like, I wasn't sure to open everything, so I was like, maybe you want to return it.
I know it's staff food. But I was like, dang.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's I'll probably leave the sweets for them. But yeah, please grab.
I can't believe it. You always keep the one thing in this store that's remarkable. Great. Now, historical fiction?
Yeah, I always love watching the modern because it's always like, you can tell. You really don't care if anybody's there. You like take what to do for the conversation. No, I know. You can tell. You can feel it. Like you like.
A little donut.
Thank you. You're welcome. Do you want the
Nope, no more sweets.
No, are you
No,
sure?
we have been so
I'm going to go get this.
bad.
Okay. I would, yeah. Alright. I just went back to look her.
Oh, if you'll eat it.
Oh no. Please. I leave in 2 days for a workshop. So
And see, they're all annoyed at me because I leave on the 21st for my 6 weeks in India. And so I've been eating through the freezer, so it's been very creative.
nice. It was like getting you're like I would have buy new food.
And they're just like, I was like, Graham, what? 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 And I was like, Bangalore to open the Best Buy office. Yeah. So I'm part of the corporate overlords offshoring jobs.
Are you?
To India.
Are you doing anything else so I mean if you're gonna be working obviously, but do you have any plans for like
I'm gonna do something 4th of July weekend. Take like 5 days and go down south of India where they have like it looks like Maldives,
Yeah.
but it's India and it's like a
Have you ever
third
been?
price of Maldives. Yeah.
Okay. No, to India.
Oh yeah.
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 Okay. Yeah. Alright, which you said which part of India?
Bangalore.
Well, congratulations and
Thank you.
enjoy.
Yeah, I will.
Should be great.
Yeah, it is. I love being there.
It's good to see you. Yes, thank you for coming. Yes.
Really glad. Hey, this is wonderful stuff.
Oh yeah. She's absolutely wonderful. Yeah. So I didn't get a chance to talk about. So she was one of my students in my workshop at Tin House, and honestly, just it was my first. It was the first sort of in-person teaching experience that I had after and honestly, it was just like what an experience to like revive my interest. Like I was like, oh yes, people are still imagination out there. There's still writing out there. There's still people who are earnest and just so yeah.
Yes.
So that was nice. Do you want to read mine?
I don't even cook with $2 chuck and yours. I got some $3 chuck now. Nope. No, thank you, Lesley.
Yeah.
And now with the construction?
You said what?
Now with the construction?
Oh, right. Yeah, honestly, it's too bad. And it's too bad about the. Can I take this for dinner?
Thank you.
Take it.
Yes. And let me hold on. But my
What time is it right now?
It is 8:06.
I'm doing pretty. Time to go buy a couple copies of this book
Yeah,
and get it
thank
assigned.
you. So you're standing at the counter and then up there.
I feel like they get suppressed on social media now, too.
I don't know what.
I don't see any of their stuff anymore.
Yeah. It's too bad. If I'd known, I wouldn't have blown money on all this food, and I would have just taken Uche out.
Yes.
That's what I should have done, but
Yeah, they just have food in these things. Or drinks.
yeah.
That's the muscle you gotta reinvigorate.
Pardon?
That's the muscle you have to reinvigorate.
I know, right? So, alright, and this is really hard. I don't want to take this stuff on top.
No, you don't.
No, I
You
don't.
don't need to.
I don't want to take any. I'll take it right. Pick the fact that stuff.
Siri actually crochet braids?
Huh? I'm thinking about it. So I saw a style I really liked, and it was jumbo crochet locks. And the locks are like this big. And I was like, oh, I just need like maybe like 20 of them. And
I'm almost
it was
positive
just like,
I've
oh.
just seen
And
that.
Double these?
Oh no,
Triple
like maybe 4 times
Oh
those.
my goodness.
I know, and I was just like, oh my god, I could just put like 20 of them and be
Yeah, because you
done.
do like 5 braid. Like, you don't even need the rounds.
No? Well, I'm thinking about how they fall. And I feel like if they're that big.
Yeah.
Then-
You do need, right, you would need the one across the
Exactly.
center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you just see.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but then you only probably need like 4 or 5 rows around your head. Or maybe, yeah.
There we go.